So, Parasite board, huh? With episode 4 threatening its appearance around the corner, I thought it would be a good idea to compile together everything I know about this random corner you probably forgot about, because it seems conspicuously important. The Parasite Plane is a section in the Beneath, added in episode 3 Act 1. It can be accessed from these 3 locations, with these 2 requiring the hunger mask. The board itself consists of 4 rooms. The main entrance leads to this small path with a heavy cyan fog. Then you enter this room with a table suspiciously classed as EP4 board. We'll come back to that in a bit. Then there are these mismatched connections to this main room, which seems to be based off of the texture of the small Parasite game boards, but it doesn't match exactly. We don't know much about the actual game. It's about resource management and theft, and there's key positions. That's about it. Finally, there's this room that exists. This is where you end up if you take the hunger mask routes. The teleport to Joxiozo is only there if you unity the effigy on the EP4 board from earlier, as that's how the board gets to Joxiozo in the first place. The background to this place is parasitesky.gif layered on top of massmoderate.gif, which you can't actually see since it's layered on top of a black background. Parasitesky.gif seems to be composed of some of the images from cache, which tells us that the Parasite Plane can see. That's nice, I suppose. It's described by Moth as an experiential bridge. These words are used once again to describe the chair that starts the focus sequence in Discovery, an experience that can bring you from one place to another, but where to and from? The main board has a magenta side and a cyan side, and this bridge thing you can't go on. It's possible the room of the board is supposed to be up there, in place of the big cyan node in the image, but I'm not sure. Most importantly, the board contains 7 magenta pieces, including the shelf, 7 cyan pieces, and 1 akizet. The pieces are apparently made to resemble Cell-Cube light bulbs. We don't have any depictions of those, but they exist, I suppose. Their legs look like container legs, which means the physical pieces are likely just little CORRU cysts. There are 20 pieces in total, and 16 distinct piece assets. 10 of these are generic, and picked randomly from these 2 sets of generic sprites depending on team. The rest of them resemble the cult team members we've met, despite them denying it, or they might have just misinterpreted your statement to specifically mean the characters on the board, but that would imply they don't have intrinsic knowledge of their counterparts, which is unlikely, as we'll see. Surely this means something. This one is a shelf. It's somewhat similar to the Pain shelf, but more strongly resembles a Vilk, what with the 5-eye pattern and all. I'm guessing here that it's part of the actual game, being some sort of immobile piece, different from the others. It stands in the corner, defended by 3 fellow magenta pieces, and Akizet is there too. The shelf does not talk. There's no corresponding cyan shelf, but if there were, the piece tally would be 7 to 8. Counting the off-board pieces, assuming Akizet to be cyan, and I have reason to think so, makes it 9 to 12. That means that if this was a fair game, then there are at least 3 pieces missing from the magenta side. Maybe those pieces were eaten in the Age of Hunger. Maybe CORRU just didn't bother with the piece counts, I'm not sure. These pieces are probably what the actual pieces look like. Their receptors are slightly different by team. They most closely resemble those of CORRU.OBSERVER, but other than that, the teams are just recolorings of each other. The specific generic piece used for a sprite is randomized upon entry of the room. The symbols in the eyes are these capital letters from the beach font. The triangle mouth doesn't have a black outline in the inside. The bracket mouth is also used by the Bosco piece. Internally referred to as bored, half of their dialogue makes sense to me, but the other half is passionate and motivated. Maybe there isn't anything to read into here, I'm not sure. There's a lost piece in the side room, placed right next to the teleport to Ozo. Its dialogue is mostly incoherent nonsense. I'm not sure if it's supposed to represent an obelisk, perhaps Dos Calvi? It seems important though. The Eaters in its Unity text is probably referring to Joxiozo inhabitants. Interesting that it knows them, I suppose. We're going in reverse alphabetical order because I want to end with Akizet, so the stack type piece is the first obelisk piece to analyze. His eyes are capital V's in beach font and his piece color is mixed. His right side is melted. Interestingly, he's the only melted piece that isn't melted through the eyes, though that might just be an artistic decision. He stands alone in the side room. He does not speak, but if you try to unity him, he says with some incoherence, "What was it for then?" What was what for? The first thing that comes to mind is his foreshadowed sacrifice. It's in his humors and we'll get to more of the evidence later. But if he does sacrifice himself, then by this it would mean that he does so for some reason that the presence of Joxiozo would be worth what was it for. Next up is Milza, the many-eyed piece, labeled G or R by the map data, colored completely cyan, with fully magenta eyes. Her left eyes are part of the beach L and her right side is melted. She's not on the board and instead is with Gakufu on the table, usually. If you get here before activating the framing device, then they'll replace these two generic pieces. I'm gonna be honest, I have no idea what this means. I am too far entrenched in parasite theory to be able to interpret this. Belzy, help me. The dialogue between her and Gakufu reveals some interesting things. Firstly, they were able to just steal rules from the framing device. E3A2 tells us that the framing device should be quite sealed off, and this seems to contradict that. Secondly, its rules do not seem right for our board. Is this referring to the main board or the EP4 board in front of them? Trying it out anyway shouldn't imply any change of board, and yet, surely a tactical board of the framing device is the right board to use the framing device's rules on. Actually, what even is the board supposed to be? I've said that it's classed as EP4 board. It's also referred to as tactical board. It's the only use of the word tactical in the whole game. Its examined description is similar to that of combat foes in an embassy, which means it's been modified by the framing device. But it's also yellow. This is important because yellow is the color of Mindspike UI, and the examined description is not like Mindspike UI. Although, I suppose if you read into mismatched code, then this means it's a piece of UI that got accidentally treated as an enemy. I'm not sure why CORRU would do this. Maybe it was just the most recognizable way to communicate it as being part of the framing device, despite being slightly incorrect. Now I say a piece of UI, but it's obviously a physical object somehow. I don't know what it is exactly, we don't see a yellow grid like this anywhere else. EP4 board. This I am least inclined to take into account for figuring out what the board is, due to its debatable canonicity. And yet the Clemens Romanus memhole code is derived from the name of a GIF, so CORRU can do these sorts of things. There must have been a reason why they chose the term EP4 board, I don't understand. Also the examined image is sistrack.gif. What the fuck? The effigies dialogue, aside from being adorable, makes me question my earlier comment about them not knowing of their respective core team members. It is still possible they just don't know how the core team members look, however. I guess I should also mention the line, her kind always loses. What does this mean? Do the pieces know of castes? Is Miltz a racist? These are the kinds of questions I live for. Karik is the 4-eyed piece, as opposed to many-eyed. 5 is just one too many. Their eyes are the beach font O. Their dialogue mostly consists of laughter. We don't get much characterization for Karik and Collapse, and we continue to not get much characterization for them here. The board assigns Karik as cyan, even though their piece has both cyan and magenta. I suppose this is a good time to talk about the colors. I mentioned a certain parasite theory earlier. This is one part of it, that the colors of pieces parallel their positions in the conflict. The conflict laid out in Suspicion is deliberately given 2 colors. Even without that, it's quite obvious that this is a parallel, because of the presence of the mixed colored pieces, the unaffiliated, the unbiased, and yet they're all assigned cyan by the board. That detail feels gravely important to me. We'll come back to it later. If parasite theory is correct, then this clearly shows us the sides here. It explains Miltz's deep distrust of Gakufu, and possibly hints to the center of the suspicion cyst itself. Kazuki is the friendly piece. This tells us that she's friendly, I guess. She's completely cyan, so by parasite theory this means that she's on the... Well, I suppose we don't actually know which side is which here. There are 2 vague lines of reasoning I can think of, but they lead to opposite results. One idea reads into this piece of dialogue from Gakufu in Discovery. Why would she bring that up? If she did not want the information to get out, then contributing to this line of reasoning would be counterproductive. This means then that she, Magenta, is on the Sherrod side, and that the Keep It a Secret side is cyan. Though you could argue she's trying to look innocent, and or that she knew Toxic would continue regardless. The other idea is to read into the board's assigning of the unaffiliated as cyan. Think about it, if you're unaffiliated, you'd want to share it, right? You wouldn't understand why it would need to be kept secret. This makes Keep It a Secret Magenta, and Share It cyan. We really need better names for them. Now both of these ratings are quite flimsy. I'm leaning towards the latter option, but I don't know. Itzel is the weeping piece. Their I is a lowercase e, and their tear-like things to the right are the dots from I or J. It can be noted that they're physically right next to Karik on the board. That's interesting. They have mixed colors. This is their dialogue. It's interesting that they want to go home. Home to where? Ubeski? Does the thought form not know what it is? They talk about Duskolvi, obviously, but they also say Kula would know what to do, and that's amazing. Their eyes are purely cyan on the inside, with magenta dots around the outside. It's similar to Tozik and Kavik's eye patterns, but not quite. I think it might actually be the same pattern as Karik and Bosco's, but their eyes are never bold enough to show a pure cyan interior. Akizet's eyes are the weirdest, with a fully magenta exterior. The eye colors of the unaffiliated being mostly cyan is weird, if they're supposed to be the opposite of their base colors, which the board assigns to also be cyan. I have no idea what to do with this information, but now you also have it. Isn't that fun? Gakufu's next. She is the smiling piece. Her eyes are capital B's. She's the only Obesque piece to be entirely magenta. I've already talked about her dialogue with Milza, so let's talk about her left side being melted. This is the second half of Parasite theory, that the melted pieces will not survive the embassy collapse. These are Tozik, Bozko, Gakfu, and Milza. These also happen to be the exact pieces that are not present on the main board. Everyone seems to agree that Tozik is going to die, likely from some heroic sacrifice, but the rest, Bozko, Gakfu, and Milza, aren't immediately obvious. Gakfu and Milza being put together in the Selkie room is especially interesting, seeing how suspicious Milza is of Gakfu. Maybe they work it out at some point, and maybe they die from the same incident. You can read into how they're only removed upon the addition of the framing device. Maybe they die in combat, but the framing device isn't equivalent to combat. It's just the only way we can experience it, so this analogy isn't perfect. That interpretation makes this line feel slightly more important for me. I don't know, maybe it is important. Maybe the thought form's like repeating fate. Maybe Velzy makes it so. Kevik is the pleased piece. I think CORRU ran out of name ideas here. He has mixed colors. His eyes could come from quite a few letters, but I think this part of the capital O matches best. He mentions his friend twice. I think by this he means Akizet, who's snooping around the magenta side. He also enjoys being here, saying it's better than maintenance work. That's another point against Gakfu and Milza's ignorance of their similarity to the core team members. So the I letters. Akizet's eyes match her name initial, but no one else's does. Itzel is the only one with a lowercase letter. Kazuki doesn't have any eyes, and her mouth doesn't fit any letter well. Neither do any of the other mouths actually. And I can't tell what Milza's melted eyes are supposed to be. I cannot pull any meaning out of this. It probably doesn't have any, going by CORRU's other uses of beach, but again, I just don't know. Bozko is the calm piece, alone in the first room. He has mixed colors, is assigned cyan by the board, and has a melted right side. The dialogue code calls him Water. Him, Kazuki, and the two gamers are the only Obesque pieces to have a code name longer than one letter. But his exception feels the most important. The lines he says are possibly referenced by Tozik when the signal starts, Milza in the Svervat's room, and also by commented out code? What? Never mind. This connection between him and Water is interesting. It's also brought up by Drowning. He's physically the closest to Water, his room is Parasite_Abyss, and there is that sign fog. Does he drown? I don't think so. He probably dies defending Kavik or something, but this is interesting nonetheless. Lastly, the instigator herself. Mixed colors, off-grid on the board. She is the curled piece. If we follow the pattern every other mixed color piece sets, then she would be assigned cyan by the board. She's investigating something about the magenta side. Her presence here makes me very suspicious of the fact that the shelf is magenta. The magenta side controls something important. What is it? I get the feeling that her investigation's not meant to be interpreted literally, and it's just to characterize her as investigative, but I've interpreted every other detail so literally that I can't help but think. We haven't done this yet in Collapse, and I don't think she did this in the past, so maybe in Ep 4 there'll be a section where she's separated from the rest of the group and we snoop around. It would seem to require at least 3 new characters, or do the pieces not have to be Obesque? Either way, it would mean the aggressor's on the magenta side, or else why would Akizet need to be stealthy around them? That might explain this conspicuous line by Gakfu, I suppose. That's my insane prediction, by the way. Every theorist is allowed one of these. Ep 4 stealth segment. Do I expect this to happen? Hell no. Will it be insanely funny if it does? Hell yes. And that's all the pieces. There's just a few things left I want to mention. If you talk to Gakfu and Milza before they're removed from the board, they have some unique dialogue. It seems to further cement them as involved in the conflict. Interestingly, their unity dialogue is actually the default case, which makes it unclear if they were meant to have it or not. It might just be confirmation bias, but this line from Gakfu makes me think more that she's on the keep it a secret side. When I first started looking into it, I didn't think there'd be this much to talk about. Why is there so much? Why does the Parasite Plane basically spoil all of Ep 4? The doyless answer is probably just because it was cool. But in universe, maybe this is just how Akizet conceptualizes the conflict? The suspicions there still refer to it as a terrible game. If the Parasite Plane was so important, are there other places we've forgotten about? I don't know, I couldn't find any. Maybe this room with the wreck is important. Maybe you can come up with something. Maybe we just have to wait for Ep 4. It isn't long from now. Is the Parasite Plane supposed to represent a certain point in time? There's a few potential clues. If you believe my Akizet prediction, then that easily places us at some point in Ep 4. Same if you read into how the pieces are already removed. If you listen to Itzel though, then this is sometime before Duskovia dies. Or they're in denial, that's possible too. It's also possible this isn't supposed to represent any specific point in time, and it's just supposed to be everyone's general reactions to the conflict or collapse. The Ep 4 board has Akizet and Kavik. Why specifically them? Well, Gakfu states that they still stand, so it could be a small hint towards the melted pieces dying, but then why are the mind cores not there? Also, hang on, why is Gakfu fighting with the Obesque pieces and Milza fighting with the aggressor's pieces? That'd mean the aggressor is Cyan, but that can't be right. I also don't think we would fight basic golems or containers down at the groundsmanry level, but I'm not sure. Yeah, so I've mentioned this throughout the video, but I don't think you truly understand the significance of this. This is 4 foreshadowed major character deaths. That's half of the people that we know in the embassy. That's pretty important. Oh, and one last thing. Check this out, look. Tainer. Alright, that's everything. See you all in Ep 4, or wherever you'll see me next anyway.